You know, some programs are a year in the making. Mark Davis and I started talking about Seattle Center's anniversary over a year ago, and here we are. It's now my pleasure to bring up our member, Seattle Forum member Lynn Lindsay, to get the program started. Lynn, as you may know, is Senior Vice President with Morgan Stanley, had a previous career with Seattle Center from 1972 to 1983, and served as Assistant Director of Seattle Center. They say it's a small world. Who would have thought that she'd be up here today to introduce her former boss almost 40 years after he hired her? Lynn?
Thank you. That puts a little age on all of us. Good afternoon. Before I introduce today's program, I would like to acknowledge two special guests, our own Rotarian, Sally Bagshaw, City Council member, and Jean Godden, also City Council member, both of whom have been so supportive of Seattle Center as it plans for its future. Thank you. We will try to move quickly because I know we're a little behind schedule for a very long program. Today is a special day as we commemorate the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, the legacy of our urban treasure, Seattle Center, and the plans for its future. As the program committee contemplated how best to celebrate the 50th anniversary, we approached C. David Eubanks and Marie McCaffrey, who just happened to be the co-chairs of the History Committee for the 50th anniversary. Of course, we contacted Robert Nellams, the current Seattle Center Director, and former Rotarian Tracy Robinson, Seattle Center Foundation Director, who's overseeing all these marvelous activities that are about to commence this coming week. Marie McCaffrey, who is with us today, Executive Director and President, founded HistoryLink with her late husband, Walt Crowley. HistoryLink offers an encyclopedia of Washington State history free online, a valuable resource for education. They also publish histories of the Northwest, including the Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition and the recently published 50th Anniversary History of Seattle Center. The Seattle Center Foundation will have this marvelous history book available out in the foyer after the program if you'd like to buy one for your own collection. With the generous assistance of KCTS Channel 9 and C.R. Douglas, who is actually a nephew of Jim Douglas, one of the original founders of the fair, Channel 9 assisted Marie in assembling an excellent series of video clips, which we thought would be great fun as we take a trip down memory lane. C. David Eubanks has served on over 50 boards and commissions and was named 1996 Citizen of the Year by the Seattle Municipal League for outstanding community service. He was a logical choice to help us remember the fair and the legacy it created. David worked on the special event staff for the 1982 World's Fair, ultimately producing and directing the dramatic closing ceremony for the fair. He remained at Seattle Center for 14 years, working to transform the site into the viable complex that it is today, and served as Assistant Director for Planning and Activities. He was instrumental in creating the Seattle Arts Commission, the Mayor's Art Festival we all know and love as Bumbershoot, and the Seattle Center Foundation. He returned to Seattle Center in 1988 to serve as Interim Director. David has also received the Seattle Center Medal of Honor given to volunteers who have dedicated many years of service. In essence, his dedication to the center represents all 50 years. David was a member of Seattle Rotary for over 20 years, a Paul Harris Fellow. He served as a board trustee and actually was on the steering committee, which helped the 75th anniversary campaign to raise the funds for KCTS Channel 9 at Seattle Center. It's all one family coming together here. David established a 30-year practice in community relations, advising hotels, developers, and nonprofits. He recently served as the renowned Lodell Reserve Interim Director and was a director for the new Magnuson Park. Following David's presentation, you'll hear from Robert Nellams, who is the current director of Seattle Center. Robert will offer some of the exciting future highlights for the center, along with 50th anniversary celebration activities. An accounting graduate of Central Washington University, Robert has worked for the City of Seattle for the past 25 years, starting in the Department of Administration. He joined the Seattle Center staff in 1996 as Director of Patron Services, subsequently serving as Deputy Director and Interim Director prior to his appointment by Mayor Nichols in November of 2006, following a nationwide search. Robert handles a staff of over 250 full-time people and hundreds of intermittent employees. With that, I'd like to introduce C. David, and we'll have some fun clips. We'll dim the lights and take a trip down memory lane to that great old year, 1962.
Well, it's nice to see a lot of women in this crowd. I was reminded when I saw Durbin just moments before we had lunch that it was when he was president, he stood up here and said, "This is the last day that this will be an all-members club. And by 2:30, we will send telegrams around the world to the largest Rotary clubs saying that we will start making members of women members to this club." So thank you, Lynn, and thank you, President Jim. We're going to try to take you through memory lane. That's hard to talk about 7 years of planning. So and then 6 months of doing, and then the next 50 years of what happened afterwards. So we'll try to take you through a little bit of all of this, but I recommend that you do watch Channel 9's hour-long program, which is really well produced. It gives you a real sense of what the fair was like, and also this history book is a pretty amazing document. So I commend both of those to you. Today we have some nice clips that were taken under the direction of Walt Crowley, who, working with Channel 9, did a small program for the commemoration of the 25th anniversary, and luckily we had those films. Actually, the interesting thing is 25 years ago, all the major players of the World's Fair actually attended the 25th wedding anniversary with Rotary and City Club together, all except Joe Gandy, who had passed away about 5 years before that. So Marie and I have been head of the history committee for the 50th anniversary, and the most amazing thing about it is history libraries and history museums have very little budgets. And so we ended up with this amazing staff of about 20 young people coming from every library, state, county, city, from a lot of small history groups, trying to find out where all the information was. And it's scattered all over Western Washington. We also wanted to do some things at the center that actually would reflect on the history. The amazing thing, after 18 months, we have a great program. You know, when you have a lot of young people who don't know what budgets are, they can get it done. It was pretty amazing. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the shakers and the movers, because we have some of the representatives here. Al Rochester was the man who actually we considered the father of the fair. Al had been a city councilman for 12 years in the 40s and the 50s. He had actually attended, and I think actually worked as a young man at the AYP. And he was having a drink at the WAC with Ross Cunningham from the Times and the then general manager of the chamber, and started talking about having a 50th anniversary event to celebrate the AYP. And that was in 1955. And he moved that discussion further, and other people started catching on to the idea of doing this. And then it said, well, we could even go so far as have an exhibition, or maybe we could have a World's Fair. Ultimately, he became the executive director of the State Commission, meaning sort of the paid staff, and sort of the heartbeat of this whole thought process. He stayed with us through the fair, and actually was sort of our grandfather, and he was the most willing participant. Every time we needed someone to greet anybody, he was prepared to go, morning, noon, and night. The most interesting one was the pigeon rally on the top of the Space Needle with Krista Speck. Now, only old gentlemen will know who Krista Speck was, but Krista Speck was a Playboy girl that actually wore the outfit at one of the Gateway shows, and she was just gorgeous, and the pigeons just loved to sit all over her. And when I asked Al if he would come to the rally, he said, "I'd be delighted. When is it?" And I said, "About 6:30 in the morning." Well, by George, he was there, dressed to the nines. Anyway, with us today is his son, Junius, who was, interestingly enough, the director of the New York World's Fair exhibit at our fair. So, Junius, would you stand up? Ewan Dingwall was the first paid employee of the World's Fair, and he actually had an office in the old Civic Auditorium, which was like a broom closet. He had been drafted to take this job in 1957, he had been with the Washington Research Council, and he knew all the business leaders and all of the politicians. So he was the perfect choice, and he had this amazing ability to move through the crowds of people, find out where the power systems were, and to make them work. And ultimately became the executive vice president of the fair and general manager, or we now call the COO. He was also head of the Post-Fair Corporation in 1963, left at the end of that year to help San Antonio start worrying about their World's Fair, and then moved to Washington where he set up a consulting office. He retired and came back to Seattle just in time for the Seattle Art Museum to draft him to be the managing director of the Great King Tut exhibition, which had 1.3 million visitors at Seattle Center. And then later in retirement, he returned to actually run Seattle Center, a city department, from 82 until 88. Pretty amazing. His daughter was going to be here, but she, as a grandmother, had emergencies of babysitting, so she is taking care of grandchildren today. The next person of the really important ones, and probably one that we will never forget for several reasons, is Eddie Carlson. Eddie Carlson viewed the fair as a businessman. It was lightened self-interest, seeing that he was the executive vice president of Western International Hotels, and probably the only real hotel chain we had in Seattle at the time. He was on many committees in these discussions about the fair, but suddenly he took a more active role as we started to combine the efforts into several committees and several bodies of work. He was sitting with Mr. Thurston one morning when Mr. Thurston had come into his office and said, "Eddie, you're very involved in a lot of civic things, but you know, the hotel business is now moving along." Thurston, of course, was head of Western Hotels, and we probably need a lot more of your time now. And he said, "Yes, I understand that, Mr. Thurston." And suddenly his telephone is ringing, so he excuses himself, turns to the desk. He told me this story. Turns to the desk, and he says, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." Hangs up. And Mr. Thurston says, "Eddie, what was that all about?" "Oh, it's just Governor Rossellini asked me to be chairman of the World's Fair Commission." And I said, "Yes." Well, the thing we're going to remember about Eddie Carlson more than anything, you know those 7 o'clock meetings we all go to in this community? He gave birth to those. And it was easy for him because he had this little place behind the cafe at the bottom of the depths of the Olympic Hotel. And so he'd have these meetings of his commission, any other meeting, and it would always be at 7 o'clock. And his office was in the penthouse on top of the building. So it was simple for him to go to work, or maybe even get a bedroom and go back to sleep. But we will forever remember him for that. But most of all, we're going to remember the sketch. 2 lines and a circle, and he mails this sketch back to the World's Fair from having dinner in a tower in Germany and said, "Maybe what we need is a Space Needle." And we'll probably remember him probably more for that sketch than anything else. Here to represent his dad is Gene Carlson. In 1959, Joe Gandy was approached by William Street to become president of the World's Fair Corporation. This was done by Bill Street, who many of you in this room probably don't know, but he was president and chief executive officer of the Frederick & Nelson's, what then in those days was considered one of the 10 most important department stores in the United States. William Street did very little community-wise, except Frederick & Nelson's had the largest loaned executive program through the 40s and the 50s than any other corporation in Seattle. And he'd actually hire people to be on his management staff to specifically represent the company at the chamber or the downtown association or things of that matter. He only belonged to himself. Just one thing he belonged to, which was the Foreign Affairs Council, and he attended all those meetings. And he did send, as I say, people out to do things. So he actually was surprising Joe to convince him that if he would become the president, that he, William Street, would become the chairman of the Fair Corporation, which was unheard of. And when that happened, the whole attitude about this fair changed in the business community. He then was able to go forth with Joe saying yes, to then get Ned Skinner, who at 39 had never done anything in this community, and convinced him to raise $10 million to underwrite the fair. And Ned told me personally that it was that moment that he learned what corporate responsibility and community was, and we all know what Ned Skinner's total life was in giving to this community, both business-wise and civically. He then also turned to Don Foster, who became head of an owner of Foster White Gallery, but at the time, he was a head purchasing man in the merchandise side of Fredericks, and said, we need someone to go to the fair program office and help them train for a month salesmen to go out and sell domestic exhibit space for the fair. Don went out there for a month and was there for 5 years and became the exhibit director for all of the program at the fair. So Willis Camp was also another Frederick Nelson's fellow, and he too then came to the fair and took over the expo lodging and also then took over the formation of the special events department. So that's sort of who Bill Street was, sort of this unheard of and unknown person that ran this incredible merchandise mart in downtown Seattle. So Joe Gandy took on this job, was unpaid for the first year. He was a man that would never take no for an answer. It took him 4 times to go to Ford Motor Company to actually get them to say yes. He actually owned the largest Ford Motor Company agency in Western Washington. But he never took no for an answer. He actually visited 80 countries in search of exhibitors for this fair. It was just an amazing process to which he did in the 3 years that he took that reign. And representing him today is his grandson and my godson, Tony Shearer. So one person we haven't talked about, and there's many more, of course, is C. Bagley Wright. And you'll see him in one of these films. And when you think of C. Bagley Wright, you think of a man very urbane, very cultured, would be quietly in board meetings in some business or corporation, and also at all the major openings of the cultural events in the city. Yes, he was all of that. But what was always amazing, he was the managing partner of the Space Needle. Can you imagine Urbane Bagley, 600-foot thing with a restaurant that went around on the top? I mean, it's hard to conceive that Bagley Wright did that, but he convinced these people to invest in himself included and ran that company for quite a few years. And he said the worst thing he ever did as a businessman was to sell his interest to the Howard Wright family. He said that exactly a year ago when we did a ceremony that celebrated the pouring of the cement for the Space Needle, which was a year ago. So I think we'll get into segment 1, and we'll sort of take you to the fair, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Let's go to the fair in Seattle. Let's pack up and be on our way. Oh, they say it's the greatest show that ever was, and scores of attractions and a million dozen thrills to excite you when you get there. You're gonna have the time of your life. So hoist the anchor you're dragging, climb aboard the bandwagon to Seattle, USA.
I think at this very moment we're previewing the official uniform for you science demonstrators, are we not?
This is correct.
Will you describe it for us in typical woman talk?
I'd love to. This is a blue sheath with the United States Science Exhibit emblem and U.S. insignia buttons.
And it's a beautiful uniform, and you look very beautiful in it.
Thank you.
Out in Seattle, where there is lots of fun, at Century 21, World's Fair Seattle.
On April 21st, 1962, the gates opened at Century 21, the Seattle World's Fair. People from across the nation and around the world began pouring into Seattle to get a glimpse of the future.
That's where the hearts are lightest, that's where the lights are brightest.
There was a Space Needle, a monorail, a science pavilion, and a bubbleator that transported you to the world of tomorrow. There were water skiers, Belgian waffles, and so much more. With more than 35 countries participating, Century 21 had entertainment and exhibits from all over the world. Take a look at who came for the festivities. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. Nat King Cole. Robert Kennedy. Former Vice President Richard Nixon. Astronaut John Glenn, among many others. But of course, the biggest star of all was Elvis.
Happy ending.
Happy ending.
Give me a story with a
Happy ending.
when mommy's gone there,
They never part again.
but live forever happily.
High above Seattle's skyline, high above our great World's Fair, half the happiness will be mine, the other half for you to share. There's a special table waiting, up higher than a bird can fly. With a splendid view, I'll be seeing you in the cafe in the sky.
For the women, there were fashion shows. And for the men, there were other shows. Gracie Hansen from Morton, Washington presented a bevy of beauties at her Paradise International Club on Show Street.
At last, the Seattle World's Fair. Look at that observation tower.
A 600-foot marvel.
They call it the Space Needle, and the restaurant on top revolves. What a view!
All of the fair in Seattle, too. And a galaxy of fun in the gateway.
Seattle World's Fair, here we come.
See you at the fair in Seattle in the summer of 62. We'll preview the space age, the world of tomorrow. I'll be sharing gear with you. We'll dine away up high in the needle. On that monorail, I'll steal a kiss from you. There'll be a festive there at the Seattle World's Fair this summer of 62. Bring a lot of money this summer of 62.
Don't you love those 1962 graphics? And don't you think how they treat women? I mean, the whole description of the Science Center outfit was amazing. In fact, I was looking at Man in Space. That was our symbol for the fair. Can't you imagine the controversy of having a symbol that just said Man in Space? We'd take 7 years just to discuss that whole graphic. 3 other people I'd like to quickly introduce is the son of Mike Dederer. Mike Dederer Sr., which was Mr. Rotarian in this club, and actually went on to be a regional and sort of a national involvement in Rotary. Was head of the Fur Exchange, and he was a trustee at the Fair Corporation, and one of his responsibilities was to assist staff in their selling of advance tickets. And so here, and at the end of the fair, he became the chairman of the board, as Mr. Street then took a safari to Iran for the Field Museum in Chicago. So then Mike sort of ended up, Senior ended up being sort of the final chairman of the board of C21 Corporation, Inc. So representing his dad is another great Rotarian, Gary Dederer. So the 2 men I'm now going to introduce you are the 2 department heads that probably had the most to do with the exterior part of making this fair very successful. Louis Larson came from his experience at AAA to start selling exhibit space, but it wasn't very long before suddenly he was put in charge of the whole advance ticket sales program, which was sort of an amazing thing that went up and down the West Coast, got into banks. It was the Bank of California, actually, were selling them when they were several blocks long. The last day they were selling them in San Francisco, which is amazing in itself. Louis went on then in the following year to do things until we decided to put Post Fair Corporation and the Seattle Center Auditorium Management, which was part of the building department, and form the Department of Seattle Center. And he came back for the mayor's office as a team of 5 people to actually integrate those 2 institutions into one great institution. And Louis brought the marketing techniques into a city department, which were sort of unheard of in those days, and had a lot to do with the beginning of the special programs that go on now full-time, year-round at Seattle Center. So Louis Larson brought $3.9 million into the treasury, so actually the underwriting could be paid off in the first 2 months of the fair. Louis Larson. And he was my boss. The guy who got this whole world going and got all the covers in magazines across the country and taught Seattle a new way to do public relations and media relations was Jay Rocky. He actually is a cougar. Olympia High School is okay, but a cougar. We got him from Alcoa's office in New York. He came here in May of 1960. He took this whole thing by storm, and those are the days when you communicated with airmail, telegraph, taxi cab, or you could go in the back door of the press room. And that's about all the vehicles you had. Can't you imagine what you could do today with the kinds of things we've got today to get the message out. But he understood how to take care of the media and made sure that any visiting media, no matter where they came from, here or from afar, have access to whatever was necessary to make this event a success. And it was a success. And he took on many, many challenges, some really big hurdles that the board had to face, but was able to convince them to step forward and make sure, like things with the Expo lodging, which got in some trouble, and the New York Times was about ready to break the story. And he got the board to agree to financially support everyone's reservations for Expo lodging, and they did, and stopped what could have been a disaster at the New York Times. So he went on then to start his own business, became one of the largest, if not the, and most prestigious public relations firm in the West Coast. I will say his first client was the Pacific Science Center, which opened on October 22nd, the day after the fair. And what's amazing is they had 1 customer. Now, he did better jobs after that. But so here's a guy I've known for a long time, Jay Rocky. So I think we can get right into segment 2. I think we're sick.
Everybody's talking about the big World's Fair in Seattle, where 1,000 different thrills are setting the pace for a fascinating trip into a world of space.
We really were, historically or internationally, a hick town way up here in the Northwest, and anybody in Texas or Missouri or Virginia, they would say, oh, pooh, if you mentioned Seattle.
Rochester had worked at Seattle's Alaska-Yukon Exposition in 1909 and felt that fair called so much attention to the city that a 50th anniversary commemoration was in order. So Rochester, a city councilman in the 50s, along with a lot of other optimists, began a process that lasted 7 years. They met, they lobbied, they raised money, and they made a World's Fair in Seattle. But it wasn't easy. The Century 21 people wanted official recognition as a World's Fair. It had to come from the Bureau of International Expositions. So they sent a delegation with a slideshow off to Paris. Only problem was the committee had never heard of Seattle. Ewan Dingwall remembers.
Our group of leaders that were there realized that we had to make a new beginning for the slide presentation to show them where Seattle was. So they started with the slide of the whole globe, but gradually focused in on the U.S. and then way over here on the other side of the country from Washington, D.C. was this other Washington.
This other Washington, what was it like in the late 50s? Bagley Wright moved here from New York around then.
Everything was accessible, no traffic jams. But it had no resident theater, had no opera, no ballet, had no restaurants to speak of. There were only a couple of restaurants. That was the Marine Room at the Olympic and Canlis that I remember in those days. And it hadn't been too many years that Seattle had liquor by the drink. The regrade was open, just parking lots, no buildings out there. And there had been no buildings built in downtown Seattle since 1928. It certainly didn't look like a metropolis. It had an open look that's now gone. Well, the Smith Tower was still the dominant building.
Until the arrival of the Space Needle, an outlandish collaboration by a group of local investors. The Needle sprouted up in less than a year, soaring over skyscraperless Seattle. It became the dominant symbol of the fair-to-be as the site developed into a real fairgrounds. The owners of the Needle insisted on opening it a week before the fair's opening day. Bagley Wright was one of them.
I wanted to see whether anybody would come or not.
See you in Seattle, see you at the fair. Take a way ahead look at tomorrow, just as if you were there.
The first day we opened it, the line ran out of the center and almost to the middle of Seattle. I've never seen so many people in my life. The view was just unbelievable. I mean, there had been no tall buildings, so it was the first time anybody had been up high enough to see what Seattle looked like.
A few days before Century 21 opened, Ewan Dingwall invited the world to a fair that he hoped would be a smash.
It's a tremendous spectacle, history-making in the whole field of world fairs. A great, great show we're all very proud of.
There's no doubt about that. Ding, thanks so much for being with us. See you at the fair.
But opening day at the fair didn't go quite as well as the Space Needle's first day. Al Rochester and his wife Marguerite were at the top of the Space Needle to watch the crowds arrive.
So we came down fairly early, went up to the platform, looked out, and all the parking lots were empty. No cars in the parking lots.
Were you worried when you looked out there?
Oh, I'm sure. I looked out, my God, is this fair going to be a flop? Nobody's interested in this?
Everybody's planning to see Seattle's spectacular $100 million World's Fair.
Pack up your troubles and forget your care. Pack up your family and head for the fair in Seattle.
It's the adventure of a lifetime.
I think the Needle was the most fun of anything because it went so quickly and success was so easy, and we were making money in a way that we had no notion that we would. It was coming in so fast that once we lost a whole sack full of money out there.
What do you mean? What happened?
Well, it was kicked under the counter, and nobody found it for 3 days.
A sack full of money?
Yeah, a sack full of money. I think about $5,000 worth.
See you at the fair in Seattle in the summer of '62.
Would you say the fair was a booming success?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think in every respect it was.
It didn't lose money. It brought a lot of money into the community during its run, and it also left the legacy of all those buildings. The Science Center, Playhouse, Opera House.
It was a great experience, and it was a great group of leaders, and it was a daring, a sort of a brash, exactly, a brash thing to do.
See you in Seattle at the big World's Fair.
So here comes Robert Mullins to tell you what's going on now and what's going to go on afterwards in the next 50 years. Robert?
Let's give C. David a hand. And one, isn't it great that we still have people who can share their history with us? I'm a big proponent of telling folks that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So the fact that my time is going to be much shorter than we had anticipated is fine. We need to pay homage and give our thanks to the visionaries that gave us this great gift. So please, let's do that. So I'm going to do this, and I was told that I have limited time, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to try not to go too fast, but if you have to leave and you walk out, I will not take personal offense, okay? It will be okay. I know we're running a little later. So the thing that's amazing to me is that we have these people who came together and said that they really wanted to create something for our city. And they had three primary goals. They wanted to put Seattle on the map. You heard the story about how people didn't know where we were. They wanted to drive economic development. You heard in there were no new buildings since the 20s. You heard that they wanted to create a civic, art, and cultural center for our community. Now think about this. 50 years later, we're celebrating an anniversary, and look at the gifts that we have. Not only do people know where Seattle is, but we have given birth to so many creative and innovative things that have come out of this community. And I suggested to you that a lot of those things came out of the spirit of the World's Fair. People believing that things could happen, people believing that they could do things. If you look at the economic development, you look at the things that have happened throughout our city. Look at that picture. You go from a skyline where the Smith Tower is basically, to something where you can't see the Smith Tower anymore over the 50-year period. And look at how our community has grown up. And then let's talk about how, after 50 years, what this place has evolved into. So you remember, go back, and you remember Mr. Wright, Backley Wright, talked about there wasn't a lot of cultural entities. You had SAM, you had the Symphony, you had the University of Washington. You didn't have a lot more in terms of arts and cultural institutions. Well, we got over 30 now, just on the grounds of Seattle Center. And think about every community that surrounds this city. They all have their own cultural, arts and cultural things. That's a great legacy, not just for our community, but for everyone in this region. It's a wonderful thing. Let me give you a few just really fast facts about the center. There are 10 million people that came to the fair in 1962, and I can still see you, so I am born and raised in Seattle. I am old enough to have gone to the fair, and yes, I did. So I would like those of you who, like me, went to the fair to just raise your hand. You see that? You see that? This is our history. This is who we are. And so we went there, and we were changed by it. I still have vivid memories of the fair and things that I saw. But think about this. 10 million people. We've been here 50 years, and we're still getting 12 million visitors at the Seattle Center today. So over 500 million people have come to Seattle Center. Think of the legacy that is, that you have the opportunity to delight and inspire that many people. Think about the fact that we have over 5,000 events that happen, over 30 resident organizations, that we drive over $1 billion of economic activity, that we have over 15,500 jobs associated with a place in the heart of our city. Think about that drives almost $400 million of labor income, wage income. Think about the taxes that support our community through state and local, over $50 million. That's what was created by the visionaries that came before us. And our challenge, I suggest to you, is that what happens next? What is the next 50? Who's going to step up and what are we going to do for our kids? I don't know about you. I have a 16-year-old daughter. My hope is that her children will have a place like Seattle Center to go. Her children will have a place that's safe, secure, that welcomes and honors all, that has a theme of art and culture, and has a goal of bringing our community together in a way that furthers us as a community as opposed to tearing us apart. That's my hope. I hope that you share that with me as we look forward. I always show this slide for people because I think it's very important for people to understand that the people that come to Seattle Center, because the name is Seattle, people believe that, well, everyone that goes there is from Seattle. Less than a quarter of our visitors are from Seattle. There are more people that come to Seattle Center that live outside of Seattle but in King County than those who live in Seattle. There are almost a quarter of our visitors who come from the rest of the state. And there's over 26% of our visitors that we come from outside of the state. We are truly a international, national, regional, local attraction. And that's something that's important. It's also something to invest in. It's something to keep, and it's something to appreciate. We decided a long time ago, we had an opportunity. We said we had people in front of us, the visionaries that were in front of us, that laid a World's Fair, that said that they were going to do this big audacious thing. And we sat back and said, okay, we can do a small celebration on April 21st and say, thank you, and let's mark the time, or we can try to do something big and bold too. Well, we're not small-minded people. We weren't raised that way. we were exposed to the World's Fair. We were exposed to possibilities. We've been exposed to the Microsofts, to the Starbucks, to Amazons. We've been exposed to a lot of things, and we believe that we can do more. So we decided we were going to do a celebration for that same 6-month period from April through October. And we were going to do it based upon themes that are important and significant in our community. Those themes are, one, in April, we're going to do sustainability. In April, May. In June, we're going to do science and technology. July, we're going to do global health. August, we're going to do learning and education. September, we're going to do commerce and innovation economy. And then October, we're going to wrap up with civic action. And then we're going to have 2 themes that are going to go through that for the whole 6 months. One, you had a great start from this, is we're going to do a history component. So we will be opening a history exhibit with a partnership through MoHI and History Link. We're going to be opening a history exhibit on the grounds that will be there right next to the International Fountain. And that will be something that will be there all 6 months. We will also be dealing or having an arts, cultural, and design theme that will happen with art, design competition, and a lot of other things that will happen throughout the 6 months. All that is going to be great. Now, all of you got on your chairs this event guide. It doesn't show everything, but it shows a lot of what's going on, a lot of highlights that are happening during those 6 months. I would bore you to death if I went through a list of all the things that were going to happen over the 6 months. But I guarantee you, if you go through here, there will be something in here for you. Because that's what Seattle Center is. It is something for everybody. It is not everything for everybody, but there is something there for everybody, and that's what we try and attempt to do. Our opening will be on April 21st. If you'd like to join us, we'll be opening on 10:30 out at the mural. And if it's raining, we'll be inside the Center House / Armory. For those of you who have the history and so forth, we call the main building on the campus the Center House. We're going to be renaming that the Armory because that's what it was. It was built in 1939 as an armory. We're going to go back to its roots, and we're going to be authentic about what it is. And we're going to welcome folks there. On closing, October 21st, we have a wonderful new relationship with the Seattle Symphony, and they're going to do a free concert at the center on October 21st as their closing. And so those things are going to happen. There's a lot of other things that are going to go on. Our partnerships, for instance, with the Seattle Opera, we're going to do a simulcast of Madame Butterfly. There will be a performance in McCall Hall. There'll be simulcast in Key Arena that will be free and open to the public. We're going to do a science fair with the Science Center that will be a new festival that will happen at the center. And it's, like Bumbershoot is about music, this will be about science and technology. And we'll do that in June with partners in the Science Center. So we're going to do a lot of those things. None of these things can happen without the public-private partnerships that we have. Over this slide on the left, you will see educational partners, funding partners, programming partners that are listed on the left. This is a list of all the partners that we've been working with on the 50th anniversary. I will just say to you that if your company's not on that list, you should talk to Tracy Robinson and make sure that you are part of that. Lastly, I just want to lay out that there's a bunch of things that are also coming. We talked about the Wright family and them owning the Space Needle. Well, they're also giving the center a wonderful gift in that they're bringing the Chihuly exhibit to the center, and that will open in May. If you haven't been by the center recently, you should go by because it's taking shape. It's going to be wonderful. Two, we are also doing a lot of work on our own to the Armory that I talked about, Center House. And if you come there, you're going to see that we're really going to be changing that space and food and beverage services, as well as the physical nature of the space. It will be something that I hope you will enjoy. We will also want to point out that the King Tut is coming back, and that will be at the Pacific Science Center, which will be another huge draw. That will open on May 24th and go through the end of the year. The last image that I have, and I do want to say it's the last image, is that we have a future at Seattle Center too, and it's been a wonderful thing to see what has happened over 50 years. We built things, and I'm an incrementalist, and we continue to do things, but we have a large vision too. And the biggest, most transformational thing that could happen and could occur at the center in our belief, is if we were to do something special with the Memorial Stadium site. And that image that you see over there is our concept of what could happen if you were to take down the walls of the Memorial Stadium, recreate a smaller version of a stadium, and open up that space to the public, because right now that's 9 acres in the heart of our campus that is poorly used and not open and readily accessible to the public. We want to change that. We want to march into the future with a campus that is tied together, that is a campus that can accommodate the needs of our community, and with a campus that works for you. So with that, I say thank you.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.